All right, so for this demonstration, my goal is to show you how to take a rough draft from a printout or a printed image and how to use a grid and to scale your final draft on a larger scale than the actual printout. So as you can see here, I've got a Batman image that's printed out on a piece of computer paper. And the first step is to make a 1" by 1" grid right on top of your image. So I start on the edge, I measure over every inch, both top and bottom, measure the inches side by side, make a perfect 1" by 1" grid within the image. Then I need to figure out how many squares are on my height and width. So I number it. So horizontally, I've got 6 squares. So it's 6 inches. Vertically, I've got 8 inches. If I ever have a area where the photo splits a square, I just count it as a full square just to make the math easier. So this Batman image right here is technically 6 inches by 8 inches. So here's where we get to use a little bit of math with art, which is always fun. So this printout's 6 inches by 8 inches. My squares are 1" by 1". If I went to my final draft paper and made my squares on my final draft paper 1" by 1", I would just end up with the exact same size as this piece of paper. But that's not what I want. I want my final draft to be larger than this. So with some simple math, we can figure out some different options to see what size paper would be best for this project. So like I said, if we went with the 1" by 1" squares on our final draft, that would just be the exact same size. We don't want that. So I usually move up by 1/2 of an inch. So the next one would be 1½ by 1½. That means that this square right here, each square in the final draft is 1½ inches wide, 1½ inches tall. All right, so if we did that, you multiply 1½ by the first number here, and you get 9. You multiply 1½ by the second number here, and you get 12. And that simply tells me the actual size of my final draft paper. It's 1½ times the size of 6 by 8. All right, so if that size works for you, 9 inches by 12 inches, great. If it seems a little small, then just move up another 1/2 of an inch. So then we have a 2" by 2" square. All right, so this means that our final draft squares are going to be 2 inches by 2 inches. If you go with this method, it's technically twice the size of your original image. So you can kind of visualize that. So 2 times 6 is 12, and 2 times 8 is 16. So the size of this paper would be 12 by 16. All right, that's actually what I went with. So my final draft right here, and I think you can probably see the very light lines for the grid, but these grid lines are actually 2 inches by 2 inches instead of the 1" by 1" grid here. And I will show you with the ruler. So as you can see here, every 2 inches is marked for this grid, both horizontally and vertically, where my original one was just 1" by 1". And when I figured out that math, I visualized the size of that and figured, yep, that's exactly what I want. If you did want something larger than that, if this isn't big enough, bump it up another 1/2 inch. Maybe all these squares here, instead of 2 inches by 2 inches, will be 2½ by 2½. And you just take the 2½ and multiply it by each of the original numbers. So 2½ times 6 is 15. 2½ times 8 is 20, and that would be the size of your final draft paper. So that's the simple math that I use to scale a printout I would like to grid onto a larger scale and figure out the math for my final draft image. And that makes sure that I keep the exact same number of squares going across horizontally, which is 6 here. In my final draft, we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 8 going vertically. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and it's the exact same, and the proportions will be identical. So hopefully this makes sense. If it doesn't, feel free to reach out and ask questions or let me know in class, and we can we can get going with this.